Chandramohan is one of those poets in India, one of those few poets in India, who in fact keeps that fine balance between content and form. When I read Chandramohan's poems for the first time, in fact, it was a very shocking experience for me. His poems, in fact, were hard hitting, and they just they ruptured some kind of a comfortable zone in which I was in, because it spoke about the hypocrisy of the society, of institutions. It spoke about the violence, with the unspoken violence within institutions, the society, the iron hand of authority. But everything was actually spoken in a kind of a telltale manner. You know, I've been reading Chandramohan's poems and bits and pieces before his collection came out. And every time I read his poems, in fact, I was shocked out of my boots, to tell you very frankly. There was a certain irreverence, there was a certain resistance, and there was also a certain rupturing of the comfort zones in which we are, that Chandramohan's poems systematically did. And that is precisely the thrust of Chandramohan's poems. His poems speak to you with a dialect that shocks you from within. He in fact draws parallels from history, from the past, which have actually real bearings in the present as well as a distant future too. For example, his poem on suicide, on fruit bats, which he was in fact speaking about, had some kind of a bearing to a contemporary issue, that is Rohit Vemula's suicide. Then he speaks about gender. His concerns, his concerns in poetry are variegated, are varied. It has a vast spectrum of concerns embedded within that. For example, he speaks about problems of urination, which sales girls have in small establishments. Though it's a small local concern, there is a kind of a global twist to it. He's actually speaking about something that men will not acknowledge at all. These are supposedly concerns which are highly feminine. But then he speaks about issues like, especially gender issues, like menstruation, like urination, etc., with a lot of concern and sensitivity. So this is what in fact makes his poems really apart from other poems. And there are these parallels that he draws, between historical ages, historical times. There are these parallels that he draws between spaces of races, people. For example, Afro-American poetry as well as Dalit poetry. The kind of parallels he draws are in fact astoundingly similar and astoundingly relevant. For example, it's interesting to take a look into the kind of linguistic images he brings into race relations in the US as well as caste disparities within India. He says, we were alphabets of the same vernacular with different phonetics, with curly vowels and black skin. Interestingly, Chandramohan speaks about many issues. On the one hand, he speaks about technological intricacies, or the way technology murders modern beings in the form of gadgets like CCTVs, or in the form of laws and rules and regulations like UAPA or NOTA. So he speaks about all these contemporary issues as kind of surveillance mechanisms on the modern human beings' actions and meanderings of the mind. On the other hand, he also speaks about certain silenced peripheries. For example, the rape of tribal girls. So we all know what happened after the Nirbhaya issue, which was indeed very laudable. The entire Delhi, entire India stood by, the kind of violation and murder of a middle class girl from Delhi. But whereas when it happens to tribal locations, There is a complete silence about it. And Chandramohan beautifully puts forward this kind of a collective silence over certain issues which are not relevant to the mass media or to the sensibilities of the society as such. In a very moving poem, in fact, Chandramohan raises these issues. The rape and murder of a tribal girl. No newspaper carried a headline or a photo feature. No youth were roused to protest. No city's life came to a standstill. No furor in the parliament. No nation's conscience was haunted. No prime minister addressed the nation. No TV channel discussions. No police officers were transferred or suspended. No candlelight marches. No billion women rising. A tribal girl was raped and murdered. So this is what happens when an issue becomes irrelevant to the common sensibility of the mass media or the masses, let us say. And Chandramohan has portrayed it very beautifully, the kind of silencing which happens in issues which are in fact shunned off as irrelevant. The way he deals with history and mythology and religion is also very peculiar because he finds these nuances, these contemporary nuances in these poems. For example, there is this poem called From a Lost Gospel, where he in fact brings about the parallels of women uh, from the past and the present, and he threads them together in this beautiful poem. He says that the first woman in his life was Mary, his mother. She was a feminist, made love, wrote a lullaby for bastard children, chanted at protest rallies against child abuse by clergymen. He had married Mary Magdalena, and she earned more than her preacher husband, wrote a sermon on equal wages for women, tried to organize prostitutes. He had kids. They sued Frederick Engels, disputing his ideas on the origin of family, private property, and the state of Catholic Church. So this particular poem is very pertinent, especially very dear to me in my personal life, because this is where theoretical activism in fact peters down to sheer hypocrisy. And he has captured it so well. The poet has actually captured such strains and such kind of a divorce between activism and theory so well in this poem. And this is where this poem becomes very, very relevant in contemporary life, because this is not only in religion, everywhere. Let it be in politics, let it be gender equality, let it be religion. Everywhere we can actually see yawning chasms between what exactly is spoken about and what exactly is done. And here is where the poet in fact becomes the mouthpiece of he in fact becomes an activist. His engagement with social issues, his concerns with the social dilemmas of the time, in fact, do not make him just a sloganeering poet as such. Though he is intensely engaged with social issues, he is committed towards exposing a lot of social problems in our society. That does not in fact prevent him, being less specific about aesthetics. He is acutely aware of the aesthetics of poetry as well. He is conscious of the form. In fact, his anxieties of the forms also come through in many of his poems. They do not clash, they combine together, and they come out pretty well in many of his poems. And that is where, in fact, Chandramohan does not become merely a sloganeering poet. In fact, he goes much above it. He transcends slogans, and then he combines, he weaves together both content and form in a kind of a magical fashion. In his Beef poem, he weaves together the anxiety of craft of writing poetry, as well as the anxiety of social taboos which are inflicted from the side of the society, from an authoritarian iron hand. He says, "My harvest of poems will be winnowed if done dexterously. The lighter, shallow poems blow away in the wind, while the heavier, meaty poems fall back onto the tray to become the fire in my belly, like beef." So this is where contemporary issues are in fact taken up, and especially the taboos are winnowed out, and he weaves magic in bringing out, in clubbing together issues as well as the crafts of writing good poetry. The poet not only speaks about identity politics in his poems. Interestingly, he also speaks about the literary world in which he is entrenched in, the trappings of it, the politics of it, as well as the alluring nature of the literary world around him. In one of his poems, the plus size poem, he says, "This poem refuses to be the world's wife. This poem is not pimple free, is printed on rough paper. This poem has cellulite in its rear end. Its rump outsizes itself off the market. This poem walks the ramp with a self-edited gait, without introduction or foreword from veterans. This poem does not opt for offshore liposuction to make itself eligible for international prizes. This poem eludes the trap in the hourglass of time." When the poet in fact iterates his own meanings of literariness into his literary world, we can also see that here is a poet who in fact pens down resistance and of course a lot of protest in his poems, and he is here to stay for a long time, and he is in fact going to write a new chapter in Indian literary history.